So I wonder if it's possible in 2025 for a MAGA Republican and a libtard Democrat to fall in love and stay in love. Can their relationship survive in this current social and political climate? Because honestly, I don't think that it can, and I don't think that it should. I genuinely don't think you should date or marry someone who is diametrically opposed to you on that level. And, you know, it used to be the case that someone's party affiliation in this country didn't necessarily reflect a whole lot about their worldview, their moral foundation. But I think these days it does say more about someone's core values than it used to, because there used to be more common ground between people of opposing political affiliations. That's why I find it quite telling that one of the couples featured in this piece in the New York Times met back in 2009. And you might think that feels like yesterday, depending on your generation, but a lot has changed since a time like that, since the Obama administration. And a lot has changed as well since the 90s when, famously, James Carville, an aide for the Clinton campaign and administration, and Mary Madeline, a top aide for the Bush administration, fell in love during the 1992 campaign and got married in 1993. And they have been this shining example for many years of a couple that are in a mixed political relationship.
I actually don't think that that translates. I think that politicians are locusts and people who work in politics are generally locusts and kind of evil, and I don't think that they really care. So I can 110% see a political operative on the left and the right getting along well enough to be married. Now, that's very different than people who fall as members of those parties or have specific political beliefs. It's like when people talk about lawyers marrying each other, like a prosecutor marrying a defense attorney. They're just, at the end of the day, they're still lawyers.
I might be biased because James Carville and Mary Madeline are both Catholics. They don't seem like terrible people on paper, from what I've learned about them today. They famously fell in love while both working as political strategists for the opposite parties. And while some skeptics have questioned whether they're as politically opposite as they seem, there is a documentary that makes it clear there was a real tension in the relationship, and that caused them both significant pain. One of them, I think this was a quote from Mary Madeline. "It never occurred to me that your love interest and politics could be a determinant in a relationship, but a majority of people don't want to date somebody from the other party. So a majority of people don't want to think like they, or don't just want to think like they think and be validated 24/7. I think that's sorrowful. I don't have to agree with him, but he makes me think." And James Carville says there are tens of millions of people in the US who don't even know anybody from the other party. And that's largely people on the left who intentionally isolate themselves from people with opposing views. He said, "I never thought about ending my marriage. It never crossed my mind." And Mary seconded that, saying, "We were not going to divorce each other. We could torture each other in perpetuity, and we came perilously close, but we were not going to get divorced. We have vigorous and active lives. We like to fish. We like to cook. We like history. We go to church. Talking about the impact of minimum wage is just not something that is high on our list of fun things to do." And they said it's possible that going to church has something to do with the strength of their commitment to their marriage. Fewer Americans have religious commitments to help them weather secular storms these days. That includes political differences.
So, and Chet, this is correct. Like neocons and Democrats in the 90s,
Yeah.
basically the same thing.
Yeah, there just weren't as many stark differences between Republicans
Yes.
and Democrats back then, or even in 2009 when these two met.
People today, a lot of people don't realize or remember that there used to be progressive Republicans and conservative Democrats. There was a time where you could be a Democrat and be for a lot of the things that conservatives today are for.
I worked for a lady who was so nice lady, bless her soul. but was what you would still call, I guess, a blue dog Democrat. They loved guns. And I'm like, you have no idea how much the party hates most of what you stand for now. I'm not going to shame you because you don't follow this stuff. You don't pay close attention. But we would talk politics. I broke my rules. And she was fun to talk to about politics. But yeah, they loved guns. And I'm like, your party does not believe in that anymore. They want to take them from you. And she didn't see it because she didn't pay attention to politics other than, to vote in elections.
There were I have friends that as recently as when Joe Biden was running for president would say things like, no, Democrats don't want to take your guns. And then when Joe Biden came out and said that he wanted to ban assault weapons and
Beto O'Rourke.
And Beto O'Rourke made those same remarks, they were like, that is so dumb of them. I don't know why they're doing that, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, look, man, you need to understand what the people you're voting for actually will do, not just what they say or what they don't say, and then assume that they would not do things that you don't want them to do. You actually need to hear them articulate opinions about the issues that you care about, because these people were, the people in particular, they were very pro-gun people, like owned guns. They're like, look, man, the Democrats don't want, this is just Republicans fear-mongering. Democrats don't want to do that. And it might be because they were from the South and like didn't understand what Democrats do. Me being from Massachusetts and seeing Democrats institute the policies that they want to, and which actually made me leave Massachusetts. That might have had something to do with it, but yeah.
Yeah. They're those types of people who say, that never happens. And then you present them with the example of it happening. And they're like, well, that was like one time.
And here's why it's a good thing.
Right. So this New York Post piece says, meet the couples who are part of a dying breed. And it showcases exactly 2 examples of mixed political relationships.
Best you could find today.
One of them is...
That's 2 more than I thought was possible.
So one of them is a more, I suppose, suburban blue-collar example of a couple that is married and has 2 kids and met back in 2009, I believe. And then the second example is, I suppose, a more white-collar urbanite example of 2 lawyers
who work in D.C.
Who work
that's
in
kind
D.C.
of what I was talking about. Like the first thing I looked for when it said like the guy was a conservative and the woman was a Democrat, I'm like, what's her job?
She's a lawyer, general counsel at a healthcare company. We'll get to that in a second. But as you would predict in both of these examples, it is the man who is a registered Republican and the woman is a registered Democrat.
Shocking.
That's not the case in the James Carville marriage, though.
Yes, that was a different one. So this mom of 2 named Samantha Miller was interviewed by the Post saying, I'm a Democrat who completely opposes Trump and his agenda, so I know it sounds crazy that I married a Republican. There are times when we won't speak about politics. We just know I'm a very, very strong-minded person in my opinions. He's very strong-minded in his. And she says that she has polar opposite views to her husband, who supports the Trump administration's agenda on economics and their crackdown on illegal immigration. She said they have a beautiful family and a strong marriage built on love, not politics.
Well, if they've got kids and they had the kids and they built this family before this stuff became so polarizing, there's a stronger foundation there than somebody who, like, tomorrow they meet on Hinge and the guy's like, yeah, I'm a Trump voter. And she's like, yeah, I think
would hope.
that.
But I did see last year around the election in 2024, lots of, influencers saying, if you're if you're a closeted liberal woman who's married to a Trump supporter, you have a moral obligation to divorce him. So, it really depends on the strength of character of the person that you married, whether they're susceptible to propaganda like that. But it is true that inter-party relationships are not only rare, but becoming rarer quickly. In 2017, 4.5% of American marriages were comprised of couples from opposing political parties. And then by 2020, that number had dropped down to 3.6%. And we don't have data from current year, but if the trend continued, that would mean fewer than 2% of marriages in the US would be inter-party.
I wonder if they asked this gentleman to wear the red hat for this photo, specifically to evoke images of being a Republican.
And this other couple that lives in D.C., actually met 20 years ago when they were both college students and then reconnected recently. And they realized as the conversation went on that since they had last spoken, the man had come to more conservative political views and is a registered Republican. And the woman in the relationship said by that time it was very clear that he was a Republican. We had already connected on a deeper level. The fiber of who he was hadn't changed, and he has not changed since. The man, the male attorney in the relationship, said, I allowed my environment to influence my politics. I grew up in DC, which is very liberal, but when I really started to think about my personal views, I realized they're more conservative and more aligned with the Republican Party. They're both relentlessly curious and enjoy engaging in debate together. On the surface, the pair disagrees on issues, but finds some surprising common ground once they discuss topics in detail. He said, you can't take a hatchet, you have to use a scalpel. He says he believes most Americans have nuanced political beliefs. People have views that might be slightly conservative, a little more liberal, and it's how those ideas come together that form your political ideology. And essentially, they said that it helps them grow even closer when they have these debates together. I think that speaks to both of their personality types, because the suburban married couple, on the other hand, absolutely refuses to talk about politics in their family.
The other one are
and
lawyers.
Whenever it comes up, they, specifically the wife, who is a Democrat, crashes out, has a super emotional overreaction to it, and can't continue the discussion. They said the Missouri couple, Samantha and Andy, often decide not to broach hot button issues if it will end in an argument. Knowing when or how to approach each other is essential, and it helps that they have been inseparable since 2009, so they're intimately familiar with each other's moods. Andy told the Post that he votes with, actually the most outrageous part of this whole piece. So the husband in this relationship says, I vote based on what's good for me and my family. Conversely, his wife says she is an empath who wants to do what's best for everyone. You are what is wrong with society, chick. Like, you are the reason why people dream about repealing the 19th Amendment. That is essentially why. It's the heat map, right? It's the heat map of empathy on the opposing political sides, where largely liberal females have more empathy directed towards people on the other side of the globe compared to their own families. She doesn't seem to have any interests in protecting the rights and freedoms of her children, which have to grow up in this country. She says, I 1000% don't believe in what's happening right now with the ICE deportations and how they're rolling out. And she cares more about the kids in cages than she cares about her own kids, who are going to have to deal with the consequences.
I imagine that her husband tried to very, very, softly explain to her that when you bring in untold numbers of people illegally, you essentially create a slave class that has no rights and no protections, and on top of hurting the economy, which hurts your own children and American citizens, you harm them by putting them into a place where they're going to have to work for somebody who has to offer them exactly none of the protections an American citizen does. That level of nuance is probably not there in that discussion. The funny thing was, the other couple, not to skip ahead, is like, they're lawyers. Of course they like to argue about it.
That
and
makes
there is
sense.
there is a more analytical approach to how they look at these things, much like Carville and his wife. They don't look at politics the way you and I do. They look at it the way a droid looks like politics, or Darth Vader. Like, they don't look at it like human beings. They look at it like operatives. It's their job to win. And so it's actually probably easier to talk about politics with somebody else who has to have, that little of a soul. Not to be overly rude to them. But I would be interested to know, like, first of all, I imagine that The men are somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine that men have a stronger tolerance for having a wife that has a differing set of political opinions than a wife would of a man who has different political opinions. The lady earlier said women who are liberals in hiding from their husbands. I don't believe that for a second. I believe the men likely are just keeping their views to themselves because they don't want to get into a fight about it.
Because they're being long housed.
Yeah.
That's the cold hard reality. The Millers told the Post that 2016 was the year when politics became a part of their daily conversations. They argued passionately during the 2024 election, and leading up to the second election, they were trying to crush his name into the ground, said the husband, crushing Trump's family into the ground, going after him with lawsuits, going after him with legal stuff to take him off the ballot. And then Samantha interjects and interrupts her husband, saying,
34-time felon.
But the same thing can be said on the other side. And then she said, we're going to start fighting during this interview. Lady, you have no right to speak to your husband that way. Even behind closed doors, but especially when people are watching. And thousands of people are going to read this. It's so disrespectful. It's outrageous.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, women's behavior is truly out of control. It really is.
So it's funny that she mentions that one specific example, because that's what happens every time people bring up what happened to Trump and the lawfare that was used against him. Now, anytime a Republican actually has, a political operative on the other side arrested for doing something illegal, like interrupting ICE while they're trying to do their job and getting in their faces and putting their hands on them, they're like, it's lawfare. Like, that's the problem. Like, if you're talking to dense, unintelligent people that don't know how to actually watch the whole video, you're not going to be able to discern where the nuance is in these things. And what they've done is essentially create a class where if Republicans acted like the Republicans of old, they would just let stuff happen to them and then be afraid to do anything to the other party because, they're going to be called names and the media is going to back them up. Well, that's not the way things are working anymore, though I do think Trump could be, more gung-ho about that stuff. But these families arguing about it. I imagine that the lawyers have a better chance of this stuff working out for them than the other couple. All it takes is the wrong argument on the wrong day of her period, and they're done.
I will call this an elder millennial or Gen X privilege.
Gen X, more even than millennial, I think.
That maybe in past...
My wife is in the chat right now. She probably wants to argue about politics.
In past administrations, everyone was pretty much a default lib and on the same page about most issues. You probably would be ill-advised at the very least, that's an understatement, to date and then marry and have children with someone who isn't on the same page with you on politics these days.
Because
I would advise against it.
Because it's so closely tied to morality in your view of the world now.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't live in the world that once existed.
I would push back on that characterization. It's not that now it's so closely tied to morality in your view of the world. It's because now people in the United States have very different views about morality and have a very different view of the world. There was a time where most Americans believed very similar things about America and about the world, about things like property rights. Most Americans would have considered themselves Christians, and things today, in 2025 are very, very different than they were in 1995 or 1985. So I don't think that I think that distinction matters. It's not that it's that the people's ideas about what are good are very different than they were 30 years ago.
I truly wish the best for these people.
I hope so. I hope they both succeed. We need those positive success stories. The last thing you want is to find out that they divorced and you've got no hope.
I don't want that for them. I do not want them to divorce over it, but I also don't want people to see this kind of story and think, oh, well, maybe it's fine that my girlfriend or boyfriend is totally opposing to me on every issue. Like, we can just work through it. It's fine.
It's a very naive idea to think that you can just ignore it.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.